Okay, so we've got a full council, so I'm calling this meeting to order. It's a special budget meeting of the town council, and we are looking at approximately 5:24 now. And I'd like to know if we have approval of the agenda. So in order to get to see who is approving, I'm going to call out each name. And as soon as somebody says, no, I want to change it, I think we'll have to open up the council members' microphones. Okay? So I'm going to start with, I've got Phil, you're number 6. You'll have to unmute and tell me if you approve the agenda.
I approve the agenda.
Okay. Hans, you're number 12. Can you tell me if you approve the? Yes. Okay. Stephen, can you tell us if you approve? And you'll have to unmute, Stephen. Okay, Stephen?
Yes.
Okay, very good. Okay, Dan?
Yes.
Okay, Jerry Lee? We didn't hear you, Jerry Lee. I'm assuming it is okay, but I didn't hear anything.
Let me try again. This is Jerry Lee. I approve the agenda.
Okay, great. All right, that's a unanimous, so the agenda is approved. Okay. Now we're going to move to the action of the day. It's 5:25 for the record. And it's the introduction of the ordinance 2020-4, fiscal year 21 budget. And Andrea, would you like to start it? You want to start the discussion? We could all, do it before.
Okay, so as just general comments or context before we get into more specifics, those paying close attention on the ordinance and the budget documents, I've updated the date so that the introduction date is April 24th now instead of April 20th. As you reviewed this, you probably noticed this isn't substantially different from FY20. We tried to adjust our revenues downward enough to be realistic and maintain our expenses to account for the uncertainty that's ahead. We think that we'll have a different opportunity maybe this year than the way that we've handled it in past years, and that after the FY20 close, when we have a better idea of what the carryover is from FY20, that there'll be an opportunity there to readjust for the FY21 budget. Additionally, the FY21 mid-year adjustment will probably be a larger exercise with more changes, maybe than it has been in the past, typically. So I think that's important to kind of keep in the back of our minds as we're going through this, that we will have other opportunities to make changes down the road. And because of the coronavirus, there's been a lot of activities and projects that wouldn't have otherwise happened in the last 2 quarters of the fiscal year. So there is likely to be more carryover, I think, than we anticipated because of that. And some of that has been reprogrammed into those same activities and projects in FY21, but trying to limit new activities and projects other than those that are really priority. So looking at revenue first, I think maybe the one way to handle this is to go through, and I'll give some overarching comments and then see if council members have questions, and then go on to operations and then go on to capital. So for revenue, our tax rates remain unchanged for FY21 for property and personal property and refuse. And then along with holding the tax.
Excuse me, this is Phil. I just have a quick question. Sorry to break in, but I looked at the document that shows for the teleconference, and it still shows as being introduced on 4/20. Are there any changes other than the date that were made?
No. Nope, just date.
Okay. Just date. Okay.
Only date.
Sorry.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. No problem. Let's see. Where was I?
Refuge.
Okay, well, along with holding the taxes the same, we also reduced the revenues. We think conservatively to account for unknowns with coronavirus, and we are, taking our cues from the state and the county and other municipalities and how they're, everyone's trying to anticipate as much as they can what reduced revenues will look like in the coming fiscal year. We have estimated 166,000 less revenue compared to last year without taking carryover into account. And then another thing that I would point out, because it's unique this year compared to previous years, is that in line 6.0, we have a one-time transfer from reserves, and this is for the WIN payment that we've discussed previously in the past. This would be a one-time payment rather than making 20 very small payments over the course of several years. That's it for kind of overarching comments for revenue. Kaki, do you have anything you'd like to mention before we take questions from council members?
No, I do not. I think you did a great job. Thank you.
Okay. So I don't know if you want to go through the list as you did before, Kaki, to see if council members have questions about revenue specifically.
Okay,
I have a question about it.
Okay, Hans, go ahead.
What is your calculation, Andrea, for real estate property taxes as to when the reassessment? We're currently basing pricing revenues based on the assessment of a year ago or 2 years ago, and that shouldn't change in 2021, I think. Right. And so my question is, did you calculate whether or not any of next year's revenue, as far as property taxes are concerned, would be affected because of reassessments?
Yes, so we did.
In other words,
we took, we applied our tax rate to what the FY21 net assessable real property base is, but then from there we reduced it by 16%. And that number is also, that number is also the same as 10% below the FY20 adopted rate. So there's kind of two ways of thinking about that number. Go ahead.
But you assumed that it would be somehow the 10% reduction. How do you calculate that, or what was the assumption for 10%? If in fact the rates are not going to change for 2021? Our
assessments won't change, but I think there's a lot of unknowns, and I'm certainly not a real estate expert, and I think we just wanted to be conservative.
You're being cautious. You're being cautious. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's
right.
Yep. You want me to add anything to that, Andrea?
Sure. Yeah, go for it.
So you all may remember what the constant yield is. So our constant yield was calculated at the 0.2035. That only was a difference of about $2,700 or so, and that would be what you would need to tax to get to the same revenue that we had already had against the base in FY20. So Andrea is right in, we're taking a 10% below the FY20 to be on the conservative side. And of course, if we get more revenue by next spring, that'll be to the benefit, and you can use that as carryover or whatever the council would like to do with that. So that's just a little add of information about the constant yield. Okay. Does anybody else have a question?
Yes, Stephen, I have one. So it looked to me like when I did a quick calc on it, the FY20 March actual on the 2.1, or I guess really more apt as 2.1.1. It was like it's running a little hotter than what the adopted mid-year budget was. So I guess it's coming in more than we anticipated, which is not a bad thing. But then the tax rate last year, so maybe that doesn't make it much of a mystery. But then it looks like the projected for next year is 15% lower. I mean, the highest like dip in real estate related I've been hearing over, and that's like a worst case scenario, and it's not expected to be as much here. So I'm wondering what's driving that 15 less. Or is it expecting like the house values to drop 15% in a year or two? Or is it some other way that this calculation is making that big of a dip?
I think that there's a lot of unknowns with this. This is uncharted territory, and this is our biggest revenue line item. So this is the place where we have the most opportunity to be cautious or be conservative. I think we need to be planning not only for this year, but thinking ahead for next year as well. If we end up, if it ends up that our revenue is higher than what we budget, that would be a welcome problem to have. And again, that's where the mid-year adjustment may happen on a different timeline, or it may be a larger exercise depending on what's happening with the economy at that time.
Okay.
I think, Kaki, I don't want to speak for you, but I think we were trying to err on the side of being too conservative rather than overestimating revenue. I don't want to get us in a situation where revenue is overestimated, especially for the coming year.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that, but I'm just curious also.
I could add something
Yeah.
to that, Stephen, if you like.
Yeah,
you may remember that. Stephen, can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
When when we get the calculations from the state, we get the assessable base, right? And you're curious about how we swung over to a 10% decrease. And Andrea is right. There's a lot of unknowns, but inside those calculations for the assessable base are also things as new construction or full year construction, abatements and deletions. So we're not, given the tough times of the COVID-19, it's quite possible people's behaviors will change about what they're doing with their property and so forth. So that's part of the reason why we've taken that kind of reduction.
Okay. Has MML or like State of Maryland given any kind of advice on what they're seeing, like as forecasts? Is there anything we could kind of piggyback off of if they're expecting things? Or
well, part of our.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I'd say part of the one consideration here is the assessment cycle that Hans alluded to. So we're in the third year of our 3-year assessment cycle. So in December, homes will be assessed again, and that assessment will kick in, or where we'll feel the impact of that financially in Garrett Park for the town is FY22, right? So it's a little challenging to compare across municipalities because of that assessment cycle. And Kaki, I don't recall if there's anything on property taxes specifically in any of the memos that we were reviewing. I know that there's a lot of information that sort of spoke to the financial picture more broadly.
Right. There was, I think you did some excellent research with the other local municipalities where everybody was sort of staying the same on some of their rates. Was that, if I recall?
Yeah, in some of those, I think some of those other towns and villages that they sort of maintained, they're kind of doing budgets that are that will look very similar to last year, but they also have larger reserves than we do. So they sort of feel like they're in a position where they're able to do that. I mean, just from a personal standpoint too, part of this is colored by my having worked in local government during the recession, and it was a very challenging time. So I'd much rather have us be kind of pleasantly surprised, during a mid-year adjustment and have some money that we can redistribute rather than at a mid-year adjustment have to be kind of doing the opposite, kind of constricting things because we don't have enough revenue to, to get through the rest of the year with what we had planned to do.
Yeah, I don't disagree, and it wouldn't be a bad problem to have that we're way overcautious. It's just, this seems like very big price drop to me. I'd be shocked if we see it, but I don't want to guarantee we won't. So we should probably move on unless anybody else has questions.
Well, we were going down, let's see, some of the council members are muted, so we've heard from Hans, we heard from Stephen. Phil, do you have any questions?
I've got a question with regard to the wind case. From what I understand, we're taking one payment instead of, I heard, 20 payments. And
I think it was 20.
Is 20 referring to one per month? I mean, is this a 1 year type deal?
No, sorry, I said per month, but it's actually per quarter.
Per quarter.
Yeah, but it's a small amount of money that we'd be paying. Trying to pull it up here. We'd be paying each quarter for several years to get us there, versus just sort of paying it once and being done with it. And because it's already in our reserve, so it's, I don't want to say earmarked, but sort of earmarked for this specific purpose. It's not, it's not coming from. I don't want to say this incorrectly, but it's not impacting our other operations expenses or capital expenses.
Okay, and the reason I'm sorry. The reason I had asked the question was twofold, because I noticed that the balance was not driven to zero. You're transferring 36,000 and change, but there's 38,000 and change. So I was wondering why that happened. And then the other thing was, why aren't we saving, even though I know it's not a lot, some for the out years? We're basically going to take it all now.
I'll take the second question first. So I believe the memo is from the state, but we received, it's from the county. The memo that we received basically gave us this option of doing a one-time payment or to do the quarterly payments, and this is the amount listed for the one-time payment. There will be some balance in the reserves. Last year, it was still, this is always kind of a moving target on how much that we would owe, and last year, during the budget adoption, we budgeted a little bit extra because we wanted to make sure that we had enough in here. I believe there was a note in the budget notes talking about interest. So I think that we were just being cautious in what we had budgeted for it last year.
Okay, so basically the rules allow us to take a one-time instead of either you take a whole bunch of small ones or you take a one-time and be done with, or the two options. That's right. Okay. Yep. That makes sense.
Right, and of course that's council's decision which way you want to do that. So.
Andrea, let me ask a related question to Wynn. I seem to recall that a couple of years ago when Rich Madalena was still our state senator, that he had worked some kind of a deal that exempted or forgave the wind payments to municipalities. And I don't know any. It's sort of a vague memory. Did you look into that, or could you look into that to see whether there was anything done at the state level to excuse us from having to pay that?
I mean, the most recent letter we got was in February of 2020, I think, that told us what that we needed to start.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool. That works. There was this vague memory, and we just wanted to make sure that we look into that.
Yeah, and the first either first payment or lump sum payment will be due in May 2021. Is when this payment starts.
Right. I see. Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to go to Jerry Lee. Jerry Lee, do you have a question?
Yes, I had two questions. Andrea, what does HUR stand for? Is that one of the state agencies?
Sorry, that's highway user revenue.
Highway user. Thank you. Okay. And then the other question I had, on the refuse collection under revenue,
Mhm.
I understand the note about how it estimated, but I don't understand why it would have gone down from this current year's budget if we have the same number of houses every year. I mean, I know that the act might be different because you might have an empty house or something like that, but
Yeah, I think that's what happens is that it depends on how many months each house is paying throughout the year, how often there are people living there throughout the year. I don't have a great way to estimate this number with any certainty, but it'll be in the ballpark of it. I could also do the number that we used for FY20 adopted if we wanted, or I could do FY17 end of year actual, since that's the highest one, sort of in recent history.
it's okay. I think it's fine the way you did it. I just wanted to understand why it fluctuated between the actual budgeted amount. I thought it was actually a
Yeah.
budget difference. Maybe it's not.
No, I just,
Thank you.
yeah, I'm trying to remember how I came up with 366 households. That might be based on previous year. Probably the calculation I used with something else.
Okay. I have no other questions about revenue.
Okay, let's go to Dan. Dan, do you have any questions?
Yes. So just a few. And this is like questions on anything, right? You're not going category by category.
No, right. We're just doing, like,
Revenue.
we're on revenue now. So if you want to talk about something on revenue.
Okay, so just in revenue, yeah, so rent for black market, I see that you've got a decrease of, if I understand that section correctly, a decrease of 20% on the whole category.
Whole category of Penn Place rents.
Yeah. So I don't know anything about any other tenants. So like I would not be, as of looking at the restaurant industry, even though I think black market could be slightly unique, while I wouldn't tell the tenant this information necessarily, I mean, I realize this is an open call. I wouldn't plan on any more than 50% maximum of a restaurant. This is kind of like anywhere in America. I think the forward-looking 12 months landlord should plan on, maximum 50% of an annual rent. That's my thought there.
That's helpful.
So you're
to know.
suggesting
you're suggesting we
downward?
lower it.
Yes. But I didn't do the math, presuming you're going to get 100% from your other tenants. In other words, I'm only looking at the restaurant one. So my advice on that is presume, frankly, 30% or 40% of a restaurant's rent for the upcoming 12 months.
We're only going to get 30%, Dan, or it would be a 30% reduction? I'm sorry. Which way did you say?
Meaning that you would only collect somewhere between 30 and 50%. And again, maybe the world goes back to normal, but if you take a restaurant like Black Market and you can reopen it with social distancing, that restaurant you basically can't reopen. There's no, maybe you have one table per room, which is not a business model. So I don't want to take too much time on that topic, but the industry is a disaster.
Well, that's interesting. We may need to have another discussion with you about that, right, Andrea? Because this is what's in their lease. I don't believe they've asked for any, grace period or some forgiveness, have they, in their rent payments?
No.
Did they pay their April rent?
I believe so. I didn't hear anything about them not paying it. So
Impressive.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to talk to
They
you.
would have notified us.
Yeah. I could talk to you about it offline, but that was just my thought. And then is the CD in is that in the revenue section? 1.5% interest on a $350,000 CD. I'm just looking at my notes,
Yes.
not the document.
Yes,
Yep.
revenue.
So
What line item are you on?
5.1.
5.1.
Thank you.
So does that mean we have a CD that gets 6% a year?
We have a CD that was doing very well. Let's see, last summer, right, Kaki? We had
Yeah.
pretty high, or maybe last spring, we had pretty high returns on it.
Yeah, they were making about, I think they were making about 2%, but that was last summer. And since then, we already know what's happened.
Yeah, and it's been invested in short term because of SRTS and needing to have it liquid to be able to pay, because it's reimbursable. So we pay the bills and then the state reimburses us. So those haven't been invested, while right now, the last last month, I guess. And then the just with the market, what it is anyway. So this is tricky to estimate. So hopefully we can do better than this, but.
So it's a short-term variable rate CD?
No, it's set
no,
at 3 months. If we sign in at 3 months, sorry, Andrea. We have been doing the short-term 3-month CDs because we were finding that with our accountants that the 2% return rate was the same as even at a 6-month. So we opted to do the short-term. But as you know, and as Andrea said, everything is down now. So it's and just to be able to have liquidated cash,
that's fine. I wasn't questioning the use of the instrument. I was just actually impressed that we've been getting 1.5% on a short-term quarterly CD.
Oh yeah, we were getting more. Yeah, we've been getting more, Dan. Yeah. And this is sort of, this is for 21, right? FY21. So we're, like Andrea says, it could be up or down. I didn't do any analysis on it to do any forecasting.
Yeah, I would think the conventional wisdom is that on a 12-month CD, you might get 1.5 or 1.75. So if you're getting 1.5 on a if you're getting 1.5 on a 3-month CD, you're a genius.
Well, we've been getting the same, like I said, last fall, we were getting the same short-term rate as any CD at 6-month and 12-month. I'm very familiar with the CDs from working at the college, so I know what you're talking about, but we're keeping it at 3 months. And, even then, at the time, more recently, we knew the rates were around 1.5. If you suggest that maybe we should knock it down to 1.1 or something.
Only just because if you look at the market rates on CDs, and I don't know where we're doing that, the market rate on CDs is around 1.5 for 12 months. So those were my only comments on revenue.
Well, that'll, again, that if you all want to be able to change that, we can do that. And maybe what would be very efficient at this point, and I actually am going to open it to the council to ask here, that if we go through this, and if we go through the revenue, go through the operations, and if you're taking notes, if you want to go back and then say, have any kind of vote on per item, like, reducing rent for, the Penn Place budget line, or reducing the 5.1 investment earnings budget line, we can go sort of vote by line item. Unless you all want to do that now as we're discussing, it might be to the benefit to wait until we finish revenue and finish operations, and then go back and decide, well, what do you all want to change? You okay with that? If you have a different idea of how you want to do this, just let me know.
I'm only worried about having a 2.5 hour meeting.
Yeah.
Oh, I definitely.
am too.
Yeah. Well, we're almost done with revenue.
Okay. I'm wondering if is there another option that maybe we could all send our notes and then via email of what items we have concerned. I'm not sure how the follow up could happen, but I mean, that controls the
Yeah,
time.
but how do we
Let me-
do? We would want to do the action to for your approval for the introduction. 'Cause
True.
we still
Yeah.
haven't done the adoption yet.
Yeah. Okay.
We have to get the introduction done. All right, so let's move on. Did I get?
Can I?
Is that Hans? Who's?
No,
who's
Yeah, I was
speaking,
wondering
please?
whether we're not done. We're not done with revenue yet, are we?
No, I wanted to go back and ask if there are. Is there anybody else who would like to ask a question?
I have a concern, and
Okay,
it follows
Hans.
along with Dan's concern about whether or not we're anticipating too good a result. On 3.0 intergovernmental receipts, 3.1 and 3.2. I just want to let the rest of the council think about the fact that in the past, when we've had hard times, and particularly when the 2008-2009 budget year was around, the first thing that happens when the big guys like the state or the county put their budgets together, they are hemorrhaging just like we are, and it's easy for them to say, well, the people at the bottom of the food chain can make up the difference. And so they did not. They would drastically reduce the proportion of the highway user funds that we were getting. I think at one year we got as little as 5,000. It was token, and the same with the county funding of revenue sharing options. We did well this year with if we're projecting it at 80,000. But I would say those are at least overstated by 50%. I would be not at all surprised if at the end of the year we found ourselves with maybe a tenth of what the state will pay. And in part of that is because the state's inclination to take care of their budgets first. And in part, it's reduced traffic flow and gasoline consumption at lower cost of gasoline. So there's several factors in that pot. And then as far as Montgomery County is concerned, the same thing is they will want to find all the resources where they can keep from paying out, and which is what they're doing to us for those revenues. So I think I'm very pessimistic about those two numbers, the 46,000 and the 75,000.
Okay. Andrea, do you want to respond?
No, I think that's it's good feedback. If we were going to reduce it, I think we'd probably just need to do it by a certain percentage, because I don't have a good any other kind of methodology to do it. So just cutting it by 25% or 50% or something.
Yeah, and my goal is to try to be realistic. That's all. Not to. I think you did a really nice job of putting this together and putting it on, but that's hard to arrive at on here. I just think it's probably unrealistic.
Okay.
This is Phil. I would second what Hans had to say, because I mean, we've been killed before in highway user revenue, and also with the revenue sharing from Montgomery County, and considering the money that they're spending these days on COVID-19 support, I think it's quite realistic to believe we may only get 50% of what we show there.
Okay.
And now, can I ask, there's another question.
Who's speaking?
Go ahead, Hans.
I'm sorry.
I have another question, but
oh, Hans, you'll have to. Okay. Right.
I have another question that has to do with 5.0 and specifically 5.2.1. There's a line item in there: large office vacated 4/10/20, which in the sense is that would it tell? I need to know what that is. I don't have any idea what we're talking about.
That's where Pat Keating was. So
he has moved.
On the other side
moved
of
out?
the town office. Yes, that's correct.
So he has moved out. So we have a hole of $30,000 to fill revenue-wise. What are we going to do to try to fill that revenue? Do we have to undertake a marketing campaign to rent that space?
If we want to rent it out, then yeah, we'd need to, put out feelers to figure out if there's somebody that would like to rent that space. So that's also part of the, reduced by 20% for potential losses, is if that space is vacant for whatever period of time.
Yes,
You know,
I
we've
understand.
talked about this in the context of the small office as well, that the town office is sort of outgrowing is outgrowing our space. So that's a different, larger discussion, but wanting to that 20% reduction is trying to take a lot of different factors into account. That, you know, I recognize that council's asked that we need to come back to council if we want to make any changes there that impact revenue regarding space, but wanting to at least account for that budget-wise before any decisions
Okay,
made.
well, that makes sense, but I really would urge strongly that we get a business proposal based on need and workload and staffing requirements and whatever else before, you know, for the council to review before we make decisions on whether or not that becomes a town use space, which means a loss of revenue, and how we're going to account for that revenue. That's just a comment, so no further discussion needed.
Yeah, I would echo that. This is Stephen. I think when I first moved to town, it was like 11 years ago, and I think we really had like basically 2 full-time equivalents, or maybe a little bit over 2. Town manager or town clerk at that time was in the office all the time, and there was rotating of admin assistant. But I think now we've gone up a little bit, and the mayor was there part-time. My understanding is, you know, maybe 10-ish hours a week. But I think we've increased some, but I don't think we've like doubled. So just, I think we really need to see a really compelling business case on if there's ever a consideration to let go or sacrifice that kind of revenue, which I think was integral to the original Penn Place master plan of that whole building, before we'd ever consider dropping that. I think we just need a really, really good business case to consider.
Thanks for the clarification. I was just going to say thanks for the clarification. It's helpful.
Sure.
Okay.
So this is Phil.
Okay, Phil.
So one of the things I had, well, 2 things I've got here. One is that I think with that office vacated, if we're going to look at increasing our office space, we ought to consider that, because one of the things we knew was that we could possibly break out a wall and move further, rather than having to take over the small office, which kind of was easier to work with, or we just plain move to the other office. I mean, I don't know, but one of the things being is that I would probably keep the large office at almost 0 for a period of time until we figure out, you know, what we want to do and how much we want to do. That was one thing. And the second thing was, all this is based on apportioned expenses, meaning that people pay for the common areas. And obviously the common areas will still require the same level of effort or maintenance and, you know, so forth to maintain them. So I guess I'm wondering if we need to take out some more money or what, because we may not get the revenue coming in, but we'll still have the expenses.
Mm-hmm.
So this is Jerry Lee. Related to that, so just clarifying, the 20% for potential losses, was that overall or specifically related to that vacated unit possibly being open for several months or something?
That's overall. So it was just applied on the total rents.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I definitely echo Stephen and Hans's concern that we not assume that we can just spread out the town offices without more study. But I think we should expect it would be difficult to fill that large office with a new tenant during the current times, and that it would probably be vacant for a period.
Yep.
Just one final thing. I think Phil made a good point. Like it may not need to be thought of as like so binary as like take over both or just stay in one. Maybe there's a slight shift in where the demising wall is, or maybe it's something advantageous to move the whole shooting match to the other side. But any of that kind of thing needs to be a really comprehensive study, because town really hasn't, in my opinion, hasn't changed that much in the 11 years I've been here, and it's gotten a little bit more complex. But like, I can't see how it would be that much different, where the office space would kind of double from what was envisioned in 2001 or 2 or whenever Penn Place was planned out. So.
Wow. Okay. We'll have to bring you up here sometime, Stephen, and show you. But I wanted to remind everybody at the budget workshop that, you know, one of the major suggestions that everybody agreed upon in terms of any kind of space, increase in space or change in space, was to bring in some, you know, consultant or somebody who would really look at the design, look at the current, you know, floor print, and look at the needs, and, you know, consider what some of the options might be. So it definitely isn't something that would just be done.
No, I'm not.
It was,
yeah, I'm not asserting that.
Your all suggestion.
Yeah, I'm not trying to assert that at all. And, you know, welcome your idea to come take a look at it, and would welcome your viewpoints. But I mean, this seems. I just don't want it to. I don't want it to get carried away, because it's kind of the kind of work I do. So it just would seem odd if it was doubling. So.
Okay. Is there anything more on the revenue?
Yeah, this is Phil. I've got another one.
Okay, Phil, go ahead. Okay.
2.3 parking fine revenue. I would personally bring that to 0, and if we actually get something, great. But I know it's a small number, but right now we still have to hire somebody, and we kind of have to figure out what we're going to end up with. So I would drive that to damn near 0 for right now. Just a suggestion.
And Dan pointed out the ramifications for restaurants for the next year too. So that's really where a lot of the parkers come from.
That and commuters.
True.
I don't know that we'd want to go exactly down to 0, Phil, but we certainly can reduce it by a whole bunch.
Yeah, that makes sense. Reduce it by a whole bunch,
As soon as
sure.
we get somebody, you know, as soon as they come on board, I mean, there's bound to be a few people.
I think you're going to, you know,
we can reduce that by a lot, for sure.
If you're thinking about restaurant users and commuters as ticketed traffic revenue, it's probably reasonable to believe that you could take your annual forecast and cut it by 50%. It's just hard to imagine a crowded train or a crowded restaurant, you know, in the first half of the year. And I'm neither a pessimist or an optimist. I'm just reading the tea leaves that are in front of me.
Yeah, I think Phil's recommendation to go to 0 is probably about as close as where that's kind of where we want to hedge towards. I'd go even less than the 50, so the 50%. So
yeah,
not down to 0 exactly, but just a little bit more than that. But so yeah, and we've always said, you know, once you get handed out a few tickets, the word will go around, and people will probably try to be more mindful of the signage, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think we're done with revenue, and unless the council would like to just agree right now on the changes that have been proposed, or would you rather just let's go through the operations and even the capital and then come back? I'd like to ask you all that. And the only way to do this is there anybody who just says, let's just keep moving? And if there's at least one person who says, let's keep moving, we probably should just do it. So let's go with Phil, your number 6. What do you want to do? Do you want to just kind of get a sense here from all council and agree on some of these changes? Or do you want to just keep moving and then come back?
Well, given the fact that the two are tied together, I think we should probably look at looping back at the end, because we're going to have to make up, at the end of the day, we're going to have to make up for all the cuts we've just discussed. So,
Sure. Okay.
and we may end up having to adjust.
Sure. Hans, what would you like to do?
I think that's probably the right way to do it. I don't,
Okay.
it's going to be difficult for us to reconcile the two all this evening. But we can certainly take a crack at it.
Okay.
When I say reconcile the two, I mean revenue versus operations.
Okay. Stephen?
Fine either way. At first I was thinking just kind of close the loop on revenues, but I think Phil and Hans raised a good point. Probably good to look at them linked at the end. So, but I'm fine either way.
All right. And how about you, Dan?
I'd be fine either way.
Okay. And Jerry Lee, how about you?
I'm fine with that plan.
Okay. So we'll just keep moving through operations then. Okay. You want to just tee it up a bit for us, Andrea, on the operations?
Sure. Let's see.
Before you move
Operations.
on, is it possible for non-council members to ask questions?
No, we were going to wait for the end after we're done.
Okay.
Would you tee us up there on operations, Andrea?
Sure. So operations are held very similar to FY20. There's $5,000 of less expenses, and that's with a $31,000 contingency. In the personnel category, our healthcare costs are expected to increase 7%, and that's similar for our insurance from Legit. So some of the increases that you see are from that. The operations includes requests from the Arboretum and Archives committees. Arboretum committee, I had to adjust downward a little bit based on the memo they provided, but of course that's open for discussion, and Jerry Lee, maybe you can chime in on those items in a little bit. There is no transfer to capital this year in the operations budget. And then what I tried to do here was make some judgment calls, budgeting for priority projects, taking into account timeliness in particular, if there's a safety issue that needs to be addressed, if something is falling apart, if it's going to deteriorate further and make it more expensive to repair in a future year. You'll notice throughout the budget notes that I did try to include references to the majority of the items that were discussed during the budget work session. So even if an item wasn't budgeted for, I tried to include a note either in operations or capital that suggested that we reassess during the FY21 mid-year budget adjustment, just as a reminder to ourselves what those priority items were that were discussed at that time. And then lastly, we've talked about this many times, but just a reminder that, with whatever we decide here on the operations side of things, that just because it's budgeted does not mean that we're necessarily going to spend that. So if things are in even worse shape than what we're predicting with the economy and our revenues fall even further than what we project, then obviously we'll make those adjustments on the operations side sort of best we can to account for that. So that's it for me in terms of the big picture.
Is there a question from anybody?
This is Phil. I'll start first one. And maybe it's not quite right for here, but in the past, we've put money into an employee reserve fund, employee leave reserve, I'm sorry. And I'm questioning, are we doing anything like that this year? Or for this budget, I mean.
I didn't make any adjustments for this year because I think last year we got it to where it needs to be. But I will make a note to go back to revisit that and ask our accountant just to make sure. But we made a pretty big adjustment there last year to get it where it needs to be.
Right, I just want to make sure we have sufficient quantity of money for anything that's outstanding we still have yet, that we're still on the hook for. And since I've got the floor, the other thing is we put some money in for the train whistle, and I'm wondering if that's something we should consider removing until a mid-year budget adjustment, just to see how things lay out.
This is Dan. I'd really like to see us keep that in there. I think there's been a lot of vocal townsfolk who have asked for this. And so I would leave it in, still up to, Andrea, she directs it to utilize it, but seems like it's been a hot topic.
I'm just looking at the fact that we've basically cut some of our revenues, I mean, $50,000 plus. But I'm fine with leaving it in. I just wanted to put it out on the table for people to talk about.
What was the number for it? I must have missed that before.
10,000.
10,000. Okay.
10,000.
I think I would be inclined to just kind of leave it as a placeholder, and then if it's not necessary to move it at mid-year. I think we were looking at a lot of reductions in revenue, but just the longer term trends in operations kind of look a little bit troubling. I mean, it's not any one thing that we can point at, but personnel is up 60% from fiscal year 17. Town administration's up 238% in that 4 years. So I was wondering, it's getting to be like big numbers. Like personnel is like half of our revenue now. So I'm wondering if we just need to also not just look at like $5,000 and $10,000 things, but to see like how we're going to really be planning things out over the long term. To kind of, are those trajectories, are they troubling to anybody else, or are they normal even for a small town as we have with like 400 houses?
Just as context, remember that an additional full-time staff member was added between, from FY17 to FY20, for example. So that's going to obviously impact your personnel quite a bit.
Yes. It was like a whole change in that type of a job too. So yeah, we're expecting it to go up, but I guess it's just it keeps going up. So if it's plateauing now, or and it is what it is. But and the town administration is really running high too. So
the increase is just 2.4% over the mid-year adopted.
I'm comparing 2017 to 21.
Oh, well, that's okay.
But it's, you see what I mean, Kaki? I mean, it's a pretty big change, 378 to 605. And town administration went from like 90 to 215.
There's a compounding effect for wage increases over years too, you know that, right?
Yes, I took real estate classes and real estate finance, but it's way much higher than that. So,
okay.
Well, it's the same compounding.
And everything, right?
Yeah, I understand all that, but
and insurance rate, everything changes since 5 years ago.
This is Jerry Lee. In that vein, so I had a question related to 11.2, I think it is, because if we've added the additional full-time staff, it's not quite clear to me why we need the additional contracted assistant support.
Our contracted support is a different sort of category of staff. So are you thinking about professional fees in particular, 11.4?
11.2.2. So, I mean, I guess the additional staff person, was that entirely maintenance or also office support? I wasn't here when the
No,
staff person was approved, and we don't get like a summary of what the different staff do. So it's a little unclear to me.
I am not sure where that was charged to previously, but currently for 11.2.2, that's office support. And so this is the support that we currently have, and then the kind of third bullet there under 11.2, support services contract for professional services. So this would be some of the items that we talked about during the budget work session. So for example, being able to clean up the code, having somebody support town communications efforts, that would all kind of fall under that, that line.
So
obviously the parking enforcement officer
is more professional. I'm sorry.
I was going to say parking enforcement officer, that you wouldn't see that in previous fiscal years either, right? That's a new position.
Right. I see that one's separate. So I understand like the one line item is for professional services that are like specialized, like the code, you definitely would want attorney support. But the contract office assistant, we have what now, 1 full-time and 2 part-time office assistants on staff? Is that what we otherwise have like on staff?
1 full-time, 1 contract office assistant, or office admin.
Oh, okay.
And then this year we have a small amount of support for the budget. But for example, okay, taking the code as one example, if we wanted to hire somebody to help us with cleaning up the code, that would get charged to both 11.2 for contract support from, either there are companies that do this or there are, people, retired managers that may be interested in doing this. But there would be also attorney fees, and the attorney fees would be under 11.4, whereas the contract support for this would be under 11.2.
Andrea, this is Hans.
Mm-hmm.
On the 11.22, is there a reason why that would not be under salaries as opposed to town administration? Number one.
Because it's not a
Number
full-time
two,
staff member.
Okay, is that person compensated with benefits?
No.
Okay. But when is it the case that salaries are considered, when this position would be considered salaries, and when is it that it's not? Is it just because, is the distinction one of being a part-timer as opposed to a full-timer?
Yeah, so we don't have any part-time staff. We either have full-time employees or we have contract employees.
Oh, I'm sorry, contract employees, yeah, okay.
Right.
So you've used it as
full-time employees are getting full benefits. They're on the payroll.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Versus contract. Mm-hmm.
And then on the let's see, the support services. Doesn't it? We're talking about professional services of the ones you enumerate here. Would that, again, why would that not be under professional services as professional fees as opposed to being in the administrative side?
Some of this is based on history to try to keep it so that it's apples to apples year to year. So this is where some of these costs have been historically charged to. So 11.4 is, I have it kind of laid out here, but our audit, videographer, accounting, legal, general engineering, right? 11.2, I I have more as our, kind of office contract employees, and I put parking enforcement in there as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, that seems logical. It's not logical on the surface of the piece of paper printed here, but your explanation seems logical.
Your point about what's versus the professional versus the support service contract may also be helped. I mean, we may, Andrea, want to move the expert for the train whistle up into the support services contract, because some of these, the costs under professional services or professional fees is really something that is pretty much on an annual basis. It's constant and it's ongoing. Whereas the support services contracts, they're more or less ad hoc. They bring them in, they do a certain job or
Sure.
statement of work, and then they may be done, or they may come back the next year. But it's not a continuum.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
So just to clarify, what is the total of office staff? I guess I was under the impression it's Andrea full-time, and then Joanne and Elizabeth kind of making up one extra person in tandem, right? Or is that wrong?
No, there's 5 full-time staff. So it's me
Well,
and
I was just talking about office, but yeah. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So for office, 2 full-time office then.
Okay.
And then 1 contract admin. Mm-hmm.
And then
again,
contract.
this year we had a small amount of contract budget support.
Okay. So 2 full-time equivalents in office, 1 contract admin, additional to that, and then the 3 maintenance staff. Is that correct?
The contract is part-time. I think it's about 10 hours a week.
Okay.
Right, Andrea? Might be. Sometimes it depends on the time of the year.
So variable right now.
And that's totally separate from accounting.
Right.
Okay.
Yes. Right.
No, the support. Yeah.
Okay.
The office support is part-time. Really part-time.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying.
This is Jerry Lee. Do you want to go to 12.1 on Arboretum operating?
Sure.
Okay, so the committee asked for 25,000 in that area. And I see you've cut it to 15. Do you want to explain your part first, and then I'll explain what the committee was hoping for?
Yeah, let me pull their memo. And a lot of this is just that I had to make it, we only had so much revenue that we're working with, right? So
right.
Having to adjust it downwards. So some of this got into, so I'm reviewing right now. So about 12.1 first, right? This is verifying the tree inventory, execute the cap. I think I was also looking at the year-to-date on this one, knowing that, that there may be things that are different needs for the coming year, but that through March we've only had about $3,000 in expenses on this line item. So to jump from 3,000 to 25 seems like a big jump.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think they have.
As I'm saying that, I do think there's an invoice that Phil owes me. So that's probably artificially low
True.
for year to date.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think in the current, these budget estimates were brought together before things became critical with the coronavirus crisis. And so the committee did not revisit them after that. So I think going for the full 25 might be, too much in this particular year, but last year they didn't have the cap completed until the end of October. And since then, they've realized, that there's a fair amount of validation work and database maintenance work. And that was what this line item was partially to cover, was to help them with some of the implementation work that they would like to undertake. But I think either 15 as a starter point towards that, and if we could maybe make a note to look again at the mid-year and see how we're doing.
Sure. Add that.
This is Phil again. Question: how much of that would be covered under, and I know I'm jumping, capital planning Arboretum 32.4? Because there's still some money left there, which I assume part of what we're talking about expense-wise is working on the tree inventory and so forth.
Yeah, there's also 10,000 in line 32.4, which is specific to the comprehensive plan and tree inventory. That's on the capital side too.
It sounds like that squares to the 25. I think Andrea was referencing earlier, right? Was it 25 or 30 that was requested?
25, I think.
Yes, and then she's got.
Yeah, 25 was requested.
Sorry, because I probably pulled from the wrong note. I think they wanted to do more outreach, and that's where line 12.1 is. Although they do mention, and this might be a bit of overlap of record keeping elements related to the cap, whereas I think they were looking at the development of the tree plan as updating the cap. But I agree. I think it's maybe not entirely clear, especially since this is our first year of actually implementing the cap, how those two relate. I think I'm okay with the 15 if you guys are.
Just out of curiosity, what's like a 1 or 2 sentence of what's envisioned as far as outreach? I mean, it is a big jump from what it used to be.
Well, they want to update the brochure. I'm not exactly sure when it was last updated, but it's a little out of date. So they would like to do that. And they currently only do in recent years, the only outreach they've done has been the tree walk. And they would like to consider doing additional outreach with the brochure update and maybe hold some other educational events.
It might be nice to see that broken out more since it's a major jump.
This is Hans. On town committees, line 12.4, we have 4,000 budgeted for expenses requiring prior approval by the council for something called ad hoc groups plus sponsorships. What is that, and is that something we can cross out of this year's budget, the 2021 budget? It's an affordability question.
That's a good question. This was something that all council members had discussed and decided at the mid-year of FY20 to create this line item to encompass all the ad hoc groups, just in case I think it was a placeholder of funding. So that's a good point.
My sense is that that's not something we should be reporting in a year like next year.
I would second Hans's thought on that, but then I think also it was sort of a compromise last year. There was a pitch to kind of do this where people would be able to apply, I think, for money to have an event sort of sponsored or catered or whatever else. But then to me, it always seemed like shaky ground. How do you choose between people and so on and so forth? I would suggest that we haven't had it historically and hasn't been an issue. And then last year, I think Dan and I both reported the CA requested some assistance for the 4th of July thing, but with all the brouhaha with this thing, that totally went by the wayside. I would just assume delete this idea.
Well, we had a process that you remember that Dan did put together. It was a fairly, I think it was a fairly rigorous one. It was very sensible that, you know, how it would work, how it would be triaged, because, you know, people who wanted certain things, you know, if it was the Citizens Association or the Women's Club or, you know, Neighbors Helping Neighbors, you know, that there would be ways for people to, if they think of an activity that they wanted some assistance with, they go to whatever committee might be maybe what might be the first place to start if it had some relationship. And anyway, I don't want to get into the weeds on that because I don't remember the whole thing exactly, but there was a process for doing that. It's just that it's not been really, it hasn't been really implemented. We haven't advertised it or anything.
Yeah, I don't see a need to have a process beyond the mid-year and the regular budget if there's really a thing like, you know, one of those things that warrants that kind of town funding. I think there'd be enough time for somebody to be able to reach out to town government and, you know, say I have this event and I want to be able to plan it and it's beneficial to all of town. I don't feel like we need to have a separate thing, but
I think it was to try to let the you know, the committees established by ordinance, to give them a little bit more flexibility in how they would do the money.
So what would you say if we reduced? I was going to say, what would you say if we reduced it to say $800, which is about the same as the FY19 actual? And to echo a brief comment, just because we have it doesn't mean in the budget doesn't mean we have to spend it. I'm open to, yeah, I'm okay with whatever you all council members want to do. The arguments are good. Either way, we haven't used it.
My sense. This is Hans. My sense is that it's the wrong message to be sending to our residents that we have enough money to in the budget to spend on things that aren't essential at this time. And then I have a follow-up question on 13.5, same category of infrastructure. It says the Arboretum Committee recommends $55,000 of tree pruning. Where did that recommendation come from, and is it still valid? 55,000 sounds like a big number for pruning trees, because we're not talking about every tree in Garrett Park. We're only talking about street trees.
Jerry Lee, so the previous year was 52,000, but it was unclear what percentage of that was tree pruning versus other. But in FY 2020, they saw significant expenditures in these activities. I'm just reading from the note from the committee. But pruning especially will remain heavy in 21. For example, all trees on Strathmore Knolls will require pruning, as will significant numbers of additional trees that are reaching a stage of maturity where pruning by the consulting arborist or town maintenance staff is not feasible. And we'll have to use a commercial company for the work.
Well, I seem to recall that Pepco did a pretty thorough job of pruning Strathmore, much to my dissatisfaction from the way the job they did. So that's clearly done.
They just did.
Yeah, I saw them out there.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's just a number I would like to better. I don't disagree with the idea of pruning trees. I think we need to do that. But I wonder about the validity of this number given what we're looking at for next year. I mean, if we can find 25,000 out of that and so just do the absolutely essential pruning as opposed to the wanted prune, that would be useful. Or helpful, I should say, as far as balancing the budget is concerned.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you look at the end of year actual for FY19, it was 26,000, and at March we're already 3/4 through the year. We've spent 29,000. Certainly, the spend rate certainly isn't getting up there towards the 52.
Right, though we did have a stop of work. It's my understanding that David Gregg's team stopped doing work at some point due to the COVID thing. So we probably for 20 will have some work that will get left to be done in the next year. I don't have a problem with reducing it some, maybe back to last year's budget, but I do think that right now there's work that's not getting done that may have to be put off to next year. So we need to leave enough budget for that.
Yeah, and you'll always have another bite at the apple, and at the mid-year coming, mid-year December. So.
The other thing I'm going to throw in here is don't forget that's for unscheduled work, which I'm going to take it means things like when trees come crashing down or they break apart and we have to take a tree down that we never planned on taking down.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's clear. I mean, obviously, if we're presented with the problem, we have to solve it.
But I think Phil's getting that plan versus.
Yeah. We've actually had some of those events happen already. And,
sure.
So clearly, you see us at 28.6 in March, and there'll probably be a little bit more. So we're definitely going to be exceeding what our end of year for was. And, you might not quite get to the 52, but definitely, your points are taken about the unanticipated, and I think that's why the number in March is going up.
I just cognizant of the fact that we don't cut it too far because we still have that unscheduled work thing we've got to account for. That's all.
Mm-hmm. It looks like our high water mark recently was like 42 something in 18. So I wonder if we should aim to be a little bit higher than that, but not necessarily 60. Like our 28 this year might have been 42-ish again, if without the slowdown.
Yeah, in 18 we had a couple ice storms, which we didn't have this year.
Yeah. And on the flip side,
FY20, the grounds expenses for FY20 that are not for tree pruning, so the other expenses in this category, annualized for FY20, are estimated to be $13,500. So just keeping that number in mind, that's the other piece of this that's not tree pruning and not unscheduled work.
Yeah, there's some other stuff. Another flip side thing is I have heard a couple residents kind of grumble that they feel like a tree pruning budget runs out, and then if you don't request early enough from the Arboretum committee, then you get left out. I don't know if that's true at all or not, but.
Yeah, I think there is a running list that that we keep. So when residents call with concerns, or if town maintenance staff notice something, if one of you calls me, or Phil Normandy notices it all goes into the same list that Phil and I share, and then that's prioritized based on safety and Phil's other determinations, and then we give that sort of, call it quarterly priority list to Mr. Gregg to deal with. So there is, I'm not sure, I don't know what to compare it to in the past in terms of having a backlog, but there is definitely a quote unquote backlog right now of things that either need to be pruned or removed, just because it's so expensive, it takes so much time. We don't do it all at once. So we try to give Mr. Gregg kind of a reasonable amount of items to do at any given time, and then kind of cycle through also rotating between, we'll do a thing of pruning, then we'll do a thing of removals, do a thing of pruning.
Okay.
So I can understand why residents would feel that way, because they may have called and they may be on that list, but it may not be a priority item, right?
Yeah, but it sounds like a good process for it. So that's helpful. If I hear that grumble again, I can explain that. So.
Yeah.
I have just another, this may sound out of left field. I noticed it's probably not something we can realistically look at for 21. Well, it really isn't. It's something we can realistically look at for 21, but I'm wondering, a long-term alternative. Maintenance, the maintenance facility. A couple times I've wondered if we do have 3 maintenance people now, instead of trying to expand town office, if one other way to look at it is, would it be helpful for them to have like a workshop? So say you build a workshop addition off the back of that, not necessarily in 21, maybe it's 22, 23, and say that costs like 150. That's like 5 years of that rent that could go to a permanent thing instead of, offsetting rent. I'm not sure it's really considered to take that whole office or even anything like that, but just throwing it out there for the future. I wonder if that's a helpful thing to have, like a workshop with a computer and, kind of handle some of that overload of people that way.
I'm not sure I'm understanding exactly what you're saying. Are you talking about if maintenance staff have a need for additional space, or are you talking about something else?
Yes. If there's a need for additional space, it couldn't be a 21 thing, but in the future, maybe build an addition off the backside of that if they're cramped for space, and rather than trying to make space in the town office. So my understanding is
they got a new shed last year, and when we got the new shed, part of that discussion, this issue came up, and I think they feel like they have adequate space now that they got another shed. So there's the we call the shop, the big building, and there's the 2 sheds behind the building. So I think they're actually okay on space right now.
Okay, just throwing it out there. I've never actually been in there, so I wasn't sure if they had any sort of like an office or like a meeting space or like a work area versus just being able to store stuff in it. So we probably don't need to get.
I mean, I'm not to say that they have all kinds of extra space, but they were really cramped for space before, and now they're sort of at a place that's better, at least.
Okay. Yeah, and it's not a near-term possibility anyway, but just throwing it out there.
Yeah.
Can I loop back to 13.5 with the trees? I mean, do we want to reduce that by some amount? Because we kind of discussed it, but never actually came up with an action. I was wondering if maybe we reduce it to 45,000.
There'll be trees and et cetera, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to put something on the table because we should probably come to some type of decision.
You broke up for me. Could you repeat the dollar amount you said?
I'm sorry, 45,000 was what I am proposing, but somebody else can propose something else if they'd like.
Yeah, I think 45 or 50 sounds logical with the conversation we were having.
I would support 45.
Yeah, I'm okay with 45 or 50.
Dan, what do you think? 45 maybe?
Dan had a chat message that he had to step away for a few minutes, so he may not be on right now.
Another thought too.
45, so we can move on.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
And another additional new expense is the parking enforcement. Is there a way to like defer that out to the mid-year or defer it to 22?
Which line?
That's
item are you
that's like the difference. We're talking about 45 versus 60 for the trees of something that's been, I'm talking about, it's up buried within personnel, but the parking enforcement, it's like 16,000. It's like $40 a household for parking enforcing in 2021 when we're probably going to look at a black market that doesn't have full capacity for a while. So
line 11.2.3 for reference.
yeah. So I don't know if there's any, is there any contractual way to consider like pushing that out?
Andrea, you made an offer. You want to tell us about that a little bit? Can you give any detail on that?
Yeah, I made an offer and she accepted, and I sent a contract over, and this was all right as all this was happening. This was, I think, the day or 2 days before the school closings were announced.
Okay.
So she didn't send a signed contract back, and she and I emailed over the next week and said, let's wait, let's see what's going on. And then a week or two later, I emailed and said, we're going to have to kind of hold on this indefinitely, but let's just sort of stay in touch with each other. So I haven't talked to her since then, just because things have been pretty busy, but that's kind of where we're at right now.
Did we sign on our end first before it went over to her?
Probably not, but I'd have to look. I mean, feels like a lifetime ago.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Okay. We'll have to get back on that. I don't know whether we're sort of stuck there or not, or if there was a caveat or provision based on available funding or any other extraordinary event. But if we didn't sign it yet, I know it would be.
Yeah.
Well, I want to get in. Okay.
Yeah.
Question mark on that one.
Trying to pull it up.
Yeah. I hate even the thought of bringing it up because I know how it feel to be on the other side, but we're just not going to have like that full demand on parking for probably for a while.
No,
so.
I agree. And not knowing exactly what might have been put in the contract, we might not need it for the 52 weeks, but that's kind of what it depends on how it was stated, to the as the offer, because like Andrea has said, we may not use it all, but this one depends on what was put in the contract. So
maybe it's like one of those things, just leave it as is and then adjust it backwards at the mid-year if for some reason it turns out less. This is like a highest case scenario.
Or we're not right, or we're not beholden to it. It'll really, it does depend on the contract language that Andrea wrote. So.
And it's our template that we use, but I'm even looking at it right now, but I'm not quickly seeing an answer to the question.
Okay.
Well, I guess we should leave it for now, so we know more about what. You have the best understanding, Andrea, of what was negotiated and what was.
I mean, we can terminate for convenience by giving written notice to the contractor 5 days with 5 days notice. So I mean, it basically just says that we would have to pay for any work completed. So I think we would be okay. The challenge on this is the if we think that we want to do parking enforcement in the next fiscal year, the time and effort to do recruitment all over again if we lose this candidate would be another consideration. Takes quite a bit of time.
This is Shirley. That makes sense to me to leave it in for now. I'm wondering, since we had this money in the FY20 budget that we are not able to put towards this particular use, could we repurpose it in 20 for the train whistle consultant?
Anything not spent in 20 will all come over as carryover.
Oh, I thought operating costs didn't carry over.
Not per line item, but they come over as carryover. So they go to all one lump sum as a carryover line item. I made sort of very vague reference to this when we started, that depending on what the economy is doing a few months from now, when FY20 closes and we know what that FY20 carryover amount is that will carry over into FY21, we may need to make some adjustments at that time. And then we may need to also make adjustments at the mid-year adjustment, just depending on where things are at, just keeping an open mind kind of to that possibility.
Mary Lee, could I, just inquire, were you thinking that money could be used in FY20 to procure the consultant experts for the whistle in FY20?
Yeah, that's why I was wondering if I don't know if there's enough time to pull that off or not.
Yeah, that's where I'm thinking, because we're coming up
Yeah, you got a month.
pretty quickly here to only have 2 months left in the fiscal year. And
I would not personally have time to help much with that.
Yeah. And I think the citizens who were really strongly advocating, there was a small group, and I think Phil knows a little bit more about it. They were going to try to go out and see what the specs would be needed, and what kind of statement of work. And I don't think that'll all get done in the next months. But maybe Phil has a different answer.
No, that's fine. Just wondering if that was an option, since it's a different kind of work. But yeah, we can move on.
No, I would agree, and I think that even once we get it done and we get a rough order of magnitude, we're still going to have to bring it before the council for approval before we try and go out for bid or do anything like that.
Right.
So I don't see it happening in the next couple of months, personally.
This is Stephen again. I just one other note about operations in general. I was noticing the numbers are going up. Like we're doing more and more, spending more. But like 4 years ago and 3 years ago, we were running like roughly like 2/3 of our revenue was going into operating expenses, and I think a lot more was going into capital budget. And then last fiscal year 2020, it looks like it's roughly all of it was going into operations, and now we're proposing a budget where more than our revenues is going into operations, which I guess we had to pull back out of capital to make that work. I mean, granted, we're talking about some adjustments now, but and then some of it's like a temporary thing. I don't know if that SRTS, the town portion, is kind of a temporary thing that's factoring that or not, but it seemed like we're spending it's like 110% of our revenue.
In there.
No, so that's a separate thing. But
we're down. You're right. We're down about 0.3% from mid-year. I mean, that was we were trying. I think, Andrea, and I don't mean to speak for you, so please chime in, but I think the overall goal was really to try to keep the operational level of services pretty much the same. We were trying to keep sort of a flat budget, except for things that we knew were going to be increased, like wage increases and benefit line items, things like that we don't have as much influence over.
Yeah.
So we were trying to keep everything else pretty close to what level services were from last year. Okay. So we didn't increase anything.
I guess
we're at 0.3 below.
That's a good point. I mean, Khaki, I guess the 778 is much lower than the 1375. Granted, we got some time still to go, and the 1375 is similar to 1370. But I'm just noting that we're much higher than the 850s, 890s that we were several years ago. I know we've made a fair amount of changes, but just notice that something we probably want to watch, that we're not stockpiling less on capital budget, because I think those are things that are near and dear to a lot of people in town. If we can make progress on those.
Of the discussion. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it.
Like the discussions that we had during the work session, right, where there was, there was some sentiment that things weren't getting done. But if you want things to get done, we have to spend money to do that. So a decision needs to be made from council on if the goal is to not spend money or if the goal is to make progress on some of these projects. I just need clear direction there.
Yeah. I'd be in favor on the latter. I think I guess Tim will need to see the progress over the next couple of years to make it all make sense. So.
And the direction I would give is that we need to really double up our focus on what are of ranking or prioritizing the longer term goals on the capital activities, and focus on and if we agree that town hall is number one, or building sidewalks is number one, or building streets is number one, or repairing streets is number one, then that becomes the focus. The number one priority becomes the focus. And if finances or our cash availability allow us, then we would do the second one if it's possible. So I think it boils down to staying focused on prioritizing, and then as we go through this 2021, we can say we can afford to do this or not. And if we say we can't afford it, then we have to stick to that and not confuse efforts with results.
This is definitely the time that it really does really
we have to be realistic.
Matter whether the priorities. I mean, if there was a time where there should be some priorities being determined, this is the time because of the COVID-19 and the potential loss in revenue. It makes a lot of sense to prioritize.
And essentially, we already done the exercise of what our priorities are, so we just need to stick to that and make sure we agree to what we thought was the case 2 months ago, and then just stick with it.
I think there's still the step that you mentioned, Hans, which is, everything was prioritized within each category, but now, I think council really needs to think about the overall ranking of what are the 3, 4, 5, 6 big things to get done, unless you want to just be falling back to like the first priority in each category. I mean, I don't remember exactly how we left it, so we're all going to decide that.
So are we moving into capital now, or is it? Sounds like it.
Does anybody have any more questions on operating before we do that?
I didn't.
Well, I guess we should ask ourselves the question is, the assumption is that we would have a 2.5% wage and salary increase. And while I'm all for that, I doubt that very many companies will be giving increases in the next 12 months. They'll be focused on trying to put things back in place where they were, and I'm wondering whether we should maybe at the beginning of the budget year of the exercise, Andrea, you talk about the cost of living having gone up 1.5%. Whether we should calculate the possibility of giving everybody a 1.5% cost of living so they don't slip backwards. Keep up with the cost of living and do that instead of this. So it saves us 1%, but it may be worthwhile looking at.
Okay.
And I would further argue, and I would further consider the possibility of taking we're running. There's my paperwork here. I'm sorry.
We can't hear you,
year to date to project. I'm sorry. Year to date, we're projecting a $350,000 carryover for this year, and then we're taking 100,000 of that and transferring it to the 2020 budget as a carryover. And I'm wondering whether we shouldn't take that $100,000 and put it into contingency for 2020 for 2021. So rather than having a contingency line item that's I believe it's 31,000, and adding $100,000 to that, and then the council will have the opportunity as we go through the year to take monies that haven't been allocated but are in contingency to prop up those areas where we need to have some additional cash infusion.
From a budgeting perspective, the way to do that would be to where the carryover comes over right now, it's part of the revenue. And so the ability to have money to put in contingency is part of that carryover. So if I increased the carryover right now, for example, by another $10,000, I would have $10,000 more to work with on the operations side. So they're connected, but you can't, quote unquote, transfer one to the other, because it's that $30,000, part of where that $31,000 contingency comes from is, where that comes from is the difference between the revenue and the operations.
Yes.
Yeah, so that includes that carryover.
It includes 100,000?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Well, so much for that idea. I was hoping that we could build up the contingency fund to give the council more flexibility to put money where it needs to be 6 months from now, rather than anticipating where it needs to be now.
Hans, I hear you, but I think the problem would be then we've got to go through and readjust everything as far as the operating side goes, because the contingency has been rolled into it. So when you look at the total operating expenses and you look at the total revenues at the bottom of the revenue page, they're both balanced in order for us to put the contingency to get cut, which I'm fine with. I think it's a perfectly good idea.
Well, I don't want to. Well, let's give it some thought.
We've already managed to whack about, I don't know, what, $35,000 out of the revenue so far. So if we're doing that, we still have to make up some money at some point in life with this budget.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would be curious to hear from other council members too, if you feel similarly to what Hans was suggesting on 10.1 for salaries. And just as part of context, I think it's
1.5.
10.1 salaries. So it would be
the category. I'm sorry. Yeah, I was. I'm sorry. I thought you said 10.1% as opposed to 1.5%. From 2.5% to 1.5% increase.
Right, and then I have $6,000 of salary.
I'm sorry. I was going to say that 2.5 isn't just cost of living, right? That 2.5 includes like a merit-based pay, and I think we track that to what the county is doing. Is that right?
Yeah, this year was it was more difficult to find out what they're doing for each union than it was in past years, which is why I removed the reference to it. So I'm not sure what the county is doing here this year. It's harder for me to ascertain that in the amount of time that I had. But just I think it's important to kind of keep it. To keep in mind that staff have been very flexible at working through what's going on right now. So, for example, maintenance staff are working shifts, but they're working. There's 7 days a week that there's coverage right now in order for them to be able to do that. And the doors of the post office at residents are understandably very freaked out about the germs that are on there are being disinfected by maintenance staff, right? So there's additional kind of duties that have come into play as well. So just kind of keeping the morale factor in our minds as well as we think about this. But I, for budgeting purposes, I need to understand what other council members think about this one as well.
So, Stephen, I wonder if maybe it's something, Andrea, maybe could put the feelers out with other municipalities to kind of see if we're in line with kind of what they're expecting with this COVID time and all. It is unusual.
Sure.
Well, federal pay raise is right now being proposed at 3.5.
Hard to hear you, Kaki.
What'd you say? You didn't hear me?
I can hear you.
So there was, and they originally had a pay raise, a 2.6, but they're now pushing for a 3.5 federal pay raise in 2021.
Yeah, I think this is Dan. I just think it depends on what your view is. You know, like you ask someone like me and what my business is going through and my industry and all of the related industries. There's
like mine.
you know, the word pay raise is not in the vocabulary. But I recognize that not, you know, my optics on my industry or an industry like Stevens aren't, you know, doesn't apply to every industry, right? If you own Zoom or Adobe or, you know, a trucking company, you know, or a grocery store, things are fantastic. So I just think we have to put, you know, we should put compensation in the context of the economic reality. It's really hard, I think, for anybody to not say that we are currently in a recession and it's going to continue. And I certainly understand the economic forecasts of a depression. But again, I may be overly influenced based on the, you know, destruction I see in my business. You know, and look, compensation is incredibly personal, and 2.5% doesn't say much. I'm, of course, dealing with thousands of people who don't have a job. So, you know, I would say I'm probably biased with my lens into a pay freeze or maintaining a job. Feels to me like a win because you're not talking about layoffs. Maybe we will be talking about layoffs, you know, in 6 months or a year. Obviously, we don't know that. And it's a very small staff, and it's a very, very personal topic, and I completely respect that. So, you know, as long as we're talking about it, I'd probably need to see exactly what those total dollars are, but I just wanted to kind of say my 2 cents on that.
And one of the options we have is that, you know, if we wanted to, is to allow enough in contingency so that if everything is going well at, let's say, by mid-year, as far as our town is concerned, or certainly by the end of the year, we could think about some bonuses for the folks that are affected.
So rather than put this increase in the base, you're just saying like a one-time, you know, bonus, right? That's what you're.
Yeah, I mean, you know,
typical years has been typical years has been both the cost of living as well as a merit pay adjustment combined, and so that does go in the base, like you see. But so you're proposing the other to just bring it out as a one-time bonus check.
Yeah, I think we as a town have been pretty.
Go ahead and finish.
I said we as a town have been pretty good about it. I think in the last 10 years of making sure. And during the last recession, we also we maintained a good pay increase. So, you know, I think we're just trying to we have to just be practical about what the reality in the world is.
So in terms of thinking about this from my standpoint, I do think we need to look for where we can cut in the budget. But I think rather than cutting from our town staff, I would look at the contracted staff, look at the parking enforcement officer, and some of those things that are, to me, a little bit more more by choice and newer considered, you know, newer idea kind of proposals for expansion, as opposed to our existing staff and keeping the morale of our existing staff.
This is Phil. I've got two questions. The first one is, do we know exactly how much this 2.5% costs us or gone to what our number is? Because I know there's some other things rolled into these salaries. So that's my first question. The second question is, what is the $6,000 salary contingency for?
Okay, the salaries line item 10.1 is just salaries. So that's whereas, 10.3 is made up of multiple types of benefits, but 10.1 is just strictly salaries, to answer that question. And then the salary contingency is just to give flexibility, just as a manager to have that flexibility if there are things that come up that could change what someone's getting paid from what I sit here and think today versus, 6 months from now. That would also give flexibility for something like bonuses, for example, right? Just builds in.
Yep.
I didn't use any of that in FY20 and don't plan to, but just having some of that flexibility kind of built in there.
So we had adopted a mid-year budget of 420 for just salaries, and it's now at 430. Does that include the 2.5% plus the 6%, or how? What are we talking here? I'm trying to get my arms around, for each, say, percentage cut of the 2.5%, and what does that save us? I mean, are we arguing tens of thousands of dollars? Or are we looking at a lot less? Because if it's a lot less, it's probably not worth us debating too much. We might go after the salary contingency. On the other hand, maybe it is a lot. I can't get my arms around that piece.
Okay, sure. FY20 salary only is 414,000, and then there was 6,000 for salary contingency. FY21 salary only would be 424,000, and then with 6,000 would be 430,000.
So that difference, Phil, between the salary of FY20 and the salary of FY21, not counting the 6,000, is about a little more than a $10,000 difference, and that is attributed to the 2.5% increase.
Right. I just want to make sure that
it's the $10,000 across 5 people.
So is it safe to say that each percentage point is, say, $4,000? Maybe I'm wrong on my math here, but
what?
That's a half
per person.
No. In other words, if we took it and we went from 2.5% to 1.5%, meaning that we dropped by 1 percentage point. What is?
Yeah.
How much do we save? That's where I'm going there.
It sounds like, Phil, you're asking, is it even small? Is it just
worth it?
Yeah.
Pretty much. I'm getting to the point of maybe we can look at the contingency instead of, we move the contingency down some, and if we need to do a mid-year adjustment, we do that, but we leave the salaries pretty much alone at our 2.5%. The math says that if we drop it by 1%, we're only saving ourselves $4,000, and $4,000 in the scheme of things is not a lot of money, but it's going to be a bunch of money when properly, of course, spread out to these people who are going to get their 2.5% versus 1.5% raise, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
So, I guess.
Yeah. So right
long
now,
story short.
sorry.
Okay, long story short, I would suggest that we leave the 2.5% alone and consider going to the contingency and maybe cutting that in half or something like that, and that might give us some savings.
And to give you a little bit more perspective, if you're reducing this by 1% so that you're only increasing the salary over the prior year by 1.5, each person, you know, it's going to be anywhere from like, you know, maybe $500 or $600 reduction up to maybe, you know, $1,000 and a little over. So each person is going to lose about $600 to, you know, $1,300. The people with a higher salary will lose, of course, the most. So you're taking $600 away from the paychecks and a little bit like $1,000 or $1,300 from a couple others.
But my point is that when you put it all together, you're only going to save, if you go down 1%, you only save $4,000, which to me is peanuts against everything else.
Right.
We would be better finding somewhere else rather than pissing off the employees. That makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it does make sense. Not worth the demoralizing impact.
Yeah, we would be just routing it out and hoping, because we don't know if a lot of other municipalities maybe end up cutting staff next year. So we got to hope that that's definitely not the case for us, and hopefully it's not the case for others either.
Right.
Again, we could look at the salary contingency, but because it's basically a bit optional, and it could be restored at the mid-year budget if it turns out that at the mid-year, you know, we're doing far better than we thought we were going to do.
Seems reasonable to me to reduce the contingency and keep the 2.5.
Let's do it.
Yep, let's go.
What do you think,
So
Andrea?
would you say, I'm thinking about reducing it down to 1,000, or do you want to reduce it to 0?
We need the money, 0.
We also have unless you're talking about the same thing, we also have the overtime budget too, because that could end up like moving around depending on, you know, snowstorms and whatnot. But, you know, say we reduce that or we're able to shift that and it's this very snowy winter, we could always find a way to balance it out with the spring, things like that. If like last hour
I'm comfortable with reducing the salary contingency to 0, knowing that you know, if there's something that comes up between now and the mid-year, it'd probably have to be executive session, but we could always discuss it at that time if I needed some money back there.
Exactly.
But I think that's fine. I think that's fine for now.
We'll make a decision. We'll make a decision that way, knowing more.
Exactly. Thank you.
Not you, Hans. Everybody else. Sorry.
I'll be a pest on your side. Don't worry.
Is there anything else on the operations before? How are we doing time-wise? Let me look. Oh, okay.
Dan?
It's already 2.5 hours. Did you say something? Did somebody say something? Dan or something? What?
This was Steven. I was joking. I said Dan said right on schedule. He didn't really, but.
Okay, are we, so we're, given the time, it's been about 2 hours since we started. Do you want to continue talking about operations? Do you want to jump over to capital? Or do we need to reschedule again? I hate to ask or put that out there. I haven't talked to Andrea about that, but what do you all want to do?
I can start just for the sound vacuum. I wonder if we can just cover capital in a couple minutes and move on and wrap up, but try to like wrap up in the next Is it feasible to wrap up in the next 10, 15, 10, 12 minutes?
It'll theoretically shorter than the other
Yeah, it
two.
should be. And we,
Forward. Mm-hmm.
part of the reason I was thinking is I think we kind of know what one of our, or at least my understanding is one of our, or two of our priorities are. Not sure why that started making that echo. Is that better?
This is Shirley. I did have one more operating thing before we move on to capital. I noticed there was additional money in the IT that would include moving cable routing based on the small office, and that seems like something we could take out now and then revisit if after we do the design consultation.
Agree.
I agree. Plus, it'd be capital, wouldn't it?
That line item includes labor for other miscellaneous expenses, like the service agreement with for the copier. Let me hold on. Sorry, I'm trying to read my notes.
I realize you'd just taking a reduction, not the whole thing, but that particular part of it doesn't seem like we would want to include.
Oh, you mean, so the 12,000 that, which are you referring to? You're referring to one of the bullets under the notes, Jerry Lee, which one?
Last bullet on 11.7, so it's the top of page 3.
Right, so that's, yeah, that's part of the sports services contract on the 24/7. We had to, well, I let Andrea talk about it. We had to go
That's
that
above.
direction.
That's the bullet above. That's a different bullet. That's what I was, yeah.
Oh.
I think I was thinking about not only if we needed to do something related to the office space, making sure that we have money budgeted there. So if we do, for example, if we do a space study, if we have that done in, say, August, then we'd be waiting until January or February to actually do anything on it because we wouldn't have funds to, like there's a sequencing, there's a timing issue here on when we would potentially be moving carryover funds depending on what comes out of our office study and when the mid-year adjustment occurs.
It just seems to me
the other
uncertain about expanding the office space at this time that we could definitely put that off at least until the mid-year adjustment.
Sure, and this goes back to just because it's budgeted doesn't mean it would get spent, right? So if we remove this, there will be no flexibility for us to move in any office spaces until probably February. Because the contingency is not big enough to kind of fill that gap, fill that hole. Not currently, anyway. I don't know. I mean, maybe the carryover, I guess I could make the argument that, excuse me, that the carryover would be large enough that we would make the contingency large enough that with 3 days notice, I could inform, Kaki and I could inform council that funds would be moved from contingency to this line item if needed. Sorry, I'm thinking on my feet here. I think that would work. Council's agreeable to that.
Are you going to, Andrea, are you going to need this potential amount for, let me back up. Do you anticipate having another contract or task order before December? Where you'll need to obligate this money onto it?
For that purpose specifically, would depend on all kinds of things.
That's earmarked here, yeah.
Yeah, so you have to, the bullets above have other IT operations support contracts. Or the other, you know, like the Island Joe.
Of the 12. Yeah, that's the current, right? But this one that has the other IT support, that one's 12,000. Right. If you're anticipating service agreement, you're going to need to obligate that money. Do you anticipate having having a service agreement before December?
I think it would depend on how quickly we
mid-year. Mm-hmm.
I think
You
it
get
depends on
the
how
design
quickly
consultant in?
we're able to get it. Right.
How quickly you would get what?
Wanted-
It would
So
depend
The
on how
space
quick.
study
And,
completed.
and
Yeah. I mean, it seems like this is talked about as like a potential emergency where funds would have to be shifted in like 3 days and versus like discussing
Oh,
one council
not
meetings and the
emergency.
next.
It's just that
Yeah.
if you remove this money, if we remove this money now, then the option available to me becomes moving funds from contingency to this line item if there's enough money to do that. But the way that I do that is I send you an email giving you 3 days notice because that's what our ordinance says the process is, right? So
Yeah. Yeah, I guess maybe an emergency is
either
not the
that
right
or
word, but I'm just wondering if it's going to pace faster than like just the regular monthly council meetings. It's not like we have an office space for 4 and we have 8 people and it's an emergency. So I just don't
there's a
understand why
difference
it's.
between an emergency and February, though, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if it's going to follow the regular budget process, it'd be part of the. If we take it out now, if it's following the regular budget process, then it'd be part of the mid-year budget adjustment. And if that's done in, December, January, or January, February, then nothing could move on this until that happens, right? The only way to move on that sooner than that is to move
pushing
money
it down the
from
road. Yeah.
contingency.
Well, this is
Or
Phil.
keep it in-
So
or keep it
one of
in.
my questions wouldn't this be under capital type work? I mean, it's kind of permanent work. And wouldn't we be able to put it under capital? Because we put it under capital contingency is far larger. Plus, there's already about 24 grand sitting out there in IT type stuff anyway, technology.
It could be, for better or worse, the way that some of these have been broken out have been labor versus capital costs. And that's, again,
So this is
historically,
mostly labor.
the labor was charged to one place and the actual hardware costs or cabling or whatever is charged to capital. I just know, too, that when it comes to IT, that we're in an old building and everything is more complicated than one would assume.
Well,
So
what I'm thinking is
high,
what I'm thinking is that we zero it out here, we put it over under capital, put that work under capital, and then that way we could move some contingency around from the budget right now, and we'd be able to afford it. At least you'd be able to have it at hand.
So it moves like from the contingency in capital, pull from there.
Yes, ma'am.
30.2.
I come from the pen.
I've got 33 contingency from what I'm reading.
So
Yeah,
are you suggesting
from
go down to move
33
the 12,000?
Yes, I'm talking about
I'm sorry,
we
are you
shifted
suggesting-
12,000 over onto
Into
30.0, and then we move money from 33.0 up to 30.2.
Go ahead and repeat it again, please.
Okay, so what I'm proposing is that we zero out the 12,000 that we're talking about that's in operations. We move that 12,000 expense, if you will, over to technology line 30.2, and then we go down to line 33 and we decrease the contingency currently at $69,000 by $12,000.
I think that's fine.
Well, no,
Again, I part of why this is in operations to begin with was just to keep the labor and sort of the more non-capital aspects of projects in one place, and then keeping the capital kind of hardware part of the project in the capital budget. But I think that it could probably be done either way.
Yeah, I'm used to that. It's a different kind of line of work, but on like hotel projects, we usually have that's a capital project that has all the material and the labor for a job. Is usually not separated out, where contract
All in
workers
one
building
bucket.
something are, treated like their town staff, like in an operating budget. This is different, like
Yeah,
if you're
this is,
doing something changing versus like maintaining something that's already there.
right. I'm doing this based on how it was done previously. So it's just to keep it consistent. And I did the same thing for FY20, just to be consistent with prior fiscal year.
Yeah.
Yes, this is Jerry Lee. I guess I'm struggling, and I realize that with like the way we're talking about this as though it's already a done deal that we'd be moving the town office space, when earlier we were talking about it as something that we're going to get some consultant to look at whether we even need to do it at all. And so I guess I'm just confused by the approach of having money ready to do it on a moment's notice when we haven't even decided to do it.
I think, again, this goes back to the discussion on if there's criticisms that we don't move quickly on things, then we need the flexibility to be able to move quickly on things. So I think we're all in agreement. We're all on the same page that no decision has been made. But if we do a space study, if it shows a certain thing, if we agree that we need to change something, whether that's the small office, the large office, moving a wall, whatever it might mean, this would just give us the flexibility to be able to do something once we have the results of that study, rather than waiting.
And of course, there's the timing of the procurement action itself. I just wanted to go back over, Phil. You say take the 12,000 out of that IT operation, so you're at 36.615, and you would reduce that by 12, right? And then you would transfer that 12,000 under transfers. You transfer that over to capital under line item 30.2. So you're basically increasing the total town fund capital account.
No.
I mean, if
Not
you take,
exactly.
I'm not sure why you, go ahead, sorry. Did I misunderstand something?
Yes. My thought was that we would basically reduce the IT operations 11.7 by $12,000, so it'd be what, 24 and change. But we would go over to technology and increase.
Yeah, you're reducing contingency by 12 and putting the 12 up into 30.2. So you're not doing any transfer over to capital. Gotcha. Right?
We're just kind of moving the debt, if you will, remove the expense, if you will. And because, yeah, so I was going to also say to Jerry Lee's point, because of the fact that it's in capital, if we don't do anything, then we can always transfer it back to contingency on a mid-year if we wanted to. But it gives us the flexibility if we decide to move to be able to do it. That's all.
Okay. All right, Andrea, we'll do it that way.
Thank you.
I know it changes the way you practiced, but yeah.
I think it's fine, though.
Okay. Okay, is there any other discussion for the operations? You want to move to capital? Okay, let's move to capital. Okay. Because I'm thinking time here.
Okay, there's a few changes here.
Yeah.
So we decreased the line for streets and curbs, recognizing that we would only be repaving Oxford in FY21. Added to sidewalks to account for the potential cost for doing sidewalks on Waverly and on Oxford. Added funds to the storm drains line for the stormwater management projects. Added some money to the website line item, understanding that if we're all in more of a remote environment, there's some upgrades that we could make to the website, in particular for online forms. And I wanted to give myself some breathing room here in case we needed to pay the website vendor to do anything in particular there, if there's any additional cost there to be able to do that. Added funds to the Arboretum plan, tree inventory per the Arboretum Committee's recommendation, and then removed some contingency just to account for the various changes that were made. That's it.
This is Stephen. I think we had pretty general agreement, and we wanted to move forward on a couple of different sidewalk repaving things this year. I guess that was when Hans was talking about like the setting priorities. I would think that sounded like a priority 1 to us. I guess also, and then 1A would be doing the Rokeby and Claremont stormwater projects. I was curious if everybody sees that the same or different.
What was the second one, Stephen?
The stormwater projects at Claremont and Rokeby. I guess we're 1A, and then 1 I think would be the sidewalks. I think we talked about Waverly. We talked about the last Oxford block. I would still like to.
Right.
I'd still like to do at the very least a study to get Kenilworth to Argyle. Also, when we had our budget meeting, I pitched the idea of studying a long-term replacement for the Waverly sidewalk from Montrose to the Penn Place driveway. Something that handles erosion and potentially like the side slope and everything else. So I think that would be like a planning project for 21 budget, but then not really a construction until like a 22, like after we get out of COVID. But so for that, I would think bump the sidewalk planning potentially a little bit from 10,000 to get engineer and a landscape architect to look at that, not just of replacement, but what's a good long-term plan for it.
We have the sidewalk planning of 10K and 32.3. Are you thinking that you would want to be bumping that up, Stephen?
Yeah, I'm suggesting bumping that to 20. I'm wondering do we need to decrease streets or I guess not, or add to stormwater is actually the other one. I wonder if you just leave stormwater or like the 28 the same, but put that extra 10 in sidewalk planning. This is my rough idea or rough guess at what it costs. Maybe it's less.
We don't have the estimate yet from Jason, do we, Andrea?
Yeah.
He's still working on that, I guess.
Yeah, because I guess it's really.
Yeah.
And I don't know about. I thought it was going to be not too complicated, maybe not too expensive to fix the yard inlet and the pipe coming out of going in and coming out to go over to the street inlet at 06 property. It's sort of an unknown. You may not even want at this point to get FY21 sounds pretty busy already. So planning for the sidewalk, of the rest of the sidewalk at Montrose and Waverly down to Penn Place, it's a short run anyway. I think, maybe it's more practical just to wait for the FY22 to get it. It's not too difficult to look at that. If somebody wanted to plan it and then execute on it, it's certainly not as expensive as any of the other sections that we've been entertaining.
Well, the Waverly one, the one by the tennis courts it's much more complicated. The other ones, it's not sitting on like flat land. So I think it requires more engineering to figure out how to stabilize that slope and resist future erosion. And I think it's a potential opportunity. It's different than other sidewalks around where it's not just in front of houses, it's in front of a park, and it's where people park cars and so on and so forth. So it may be a little bit of a unique one. So and it could all fit within $10,000. I think that's a good project to start getting the ball rolling, even if it's not realistic to construct it until 22. And I'd be in favor of all four of those sidewalk things, the replacement of asphalt on Waverly, redoing that part by the courts, plus doing Montrose or the Oxford block, plus doing the rest of Kenilworth. So maybe I'm the only one. But
we also have Oxford. We also have Oxford repaving.
Yeah, and I was curious about that with the streets
and we haven't even talked about the town hall planning.
Yeah, that's going to be that's going to have to be a longer one out. The town hall. It's such a big number for potential for kind of construction. So we'll be fine with the amount of capital planning we have in here for now. But I'm thinking of other things that could be realistic to build in 24 or plan out that haven't already been thought about for planning. Or build in 21. Sorry.
One of the things that we have to consider is, as we consider the tennis court sidewalks that go along Waverly, as you and I have discussed, I mean, what's critical is figuring out whether or not that we can do that with the existing trees there, or whether we have to consider seriously taking those trees out because they're the wrong kind of tree to be planting next to a sidewalk due to root heave. So, I think it's a decision we have to make with the consultation of an arborist. But I think it's really important to think of both of them at the same time and not think of the sidewalk as discrete from the trees.
I agree, but that's kind of why I'm thinking a landscape architect will be helpful on that one too, because it may just be a whole different look than, and they usually work with arborists as well. But it doesn't have to be elaborate, and but that's the proposal.
Well, we still have 57,000 in the capital contingency. I would make a suggestion that you all consider just keeping it there, and then as we get closer towards if we get into February and March and everybody is still standing and breathing and they want to take on putting out another procurement for a landscape
sounds like
construction, that we take the money at that point and do it. I just envision that there's going to be a lot of work going on.
That sounds like a plan.
How long they take? I'm sorry, what?
Which number were you thinking of possibly moving? Contingency?
Well, yeah, because I think you all had already said that taking 12,000 out of the contingency and putting it up into the IT. So now you reduce. You're at 57. I'm rounding. 57.
No, I understand. Yeah.
In these capital budget ones, we can move them around within the category just in a couple council meetings if we wanted to, right? We don't have to wait for a mid-year necessarily. Yeah, because it wouldn't be something that would take weeks. It would be something that
it would have to be a council action, but you could do it, I think.
Yeah, this is not like a thing that would occur over weeks. It could occur just fine over months. So, but it just wanted to get that proposal out there. And question on the streets too. We've been, I think it fell by the wayside for a little bit. We're remembering we need to do the Oxford because that was deferred until after sidewalks are done. Where are we on other streets? I don't know if any analysis has been done this year. I think we were trying to get, I can't remember if it was the number 1s or the number 6s were the worst case scenario, but are we all done with all the worst case scenarios?
Oh, we've been done with the worst case scenarios. No, yeah, we've been done with those.
Okay, so I think we deferred Oxford, and I think we deferred Shelley Court, I think last year.
Court, yeah.
I don't know if there was anything else.
Shelley and Cambria, those two were going to have.
And there was a section of
Kenilworth.
I think there was a section of Kenilworth that we deferred.
Yeah.
I have on my list here Shelley, Rokeby, Argyle to Waverly, Cambria, Raleigh to East End, and all of Oxford were be sort of the full plate.
Right.
To-do list. Okay.
Right. Yeah, and we do have that down there at Rokeby and Argyle and coming up through that Penn Place. That is an absolute mess. Yeah. But we did make a promise to residents that we would do the Oxford after the sidewalks were done.
Yeah, that's got to be number one.
Have we got an estimate for that? I know I saw the number 50,000 somewhere, but I don't know whether that's a yes. For the block of Oxford between Montrose and Kenilworth.
Oh, that. Between that, you mean the sidewalk section?
Between Montrose and Kenilworth.
Yeah, you're talking about the sidewalk? Or, because we were just talking about paving. Which were you talking about?
No, the sidewalk.
Yeah, I hear you.
Have we gotten a bit?
We don't have, no, we don't have, I don't think, right, Kagi? I don't think we have an estimate.
No. Right, we stopped it short,
Okay.
and, everybody said, don't trade off, that's kind of worse. I hear silence. Are you still all looking? Or?
Well, I'm fading. I'm not really focusing anymore.
Okay.
And
sorry, go ahead, whoever's speaking.
Does Andrea have enough to make the adjustments? It sounded like they had consensus, or do we have to circle back on anything? Or
I think so. What I can do is I can, like I've done in previous years, I can highlight in yellow in both the budget notes and the budget where I make any changes, so it's really obvious to folks.
Yep.
And if everybody's okay with it, I can, go back and listen to the recording where I need to, or check back in with folks where I feel like I need to on certain items, and then just kind of make some judgment calls based on the discussion and what I think council was asking for changes to be made.
Yep. And then we could turn that around. If you could send it out, and we could.
Well, actually, I was thinking of something even more efficient on, if you don't mind me interjecting quick because of the time tonight and everything, but we would need to, we're going to have to introduce this budget. We haven't introduced it yet. So, and then we have to adopt it. And one of the things I'd suggest, if you want to trust, the town office, is introduce it with the amended changes. And, I know we don't have a full list in front of us, but we got all the notes. Council votes yes or no. And then in the next council meeting for adoption, that's where if we didn't quite get the number right, we can still tweak it, and then you can still adopt with that change. I don't know how you feel about it, but just one way to look at it, get this done. Otherwise, I don't know how you're going to introduce this budget until after, the new council. And then we definitely, we have to have it adopted before 30 days before the end of the year. Isn't that right, Andrea? Yeah.
Yep, that's right.
So what do people think about that?
Well,
how do you want to do that?
How complete is that to be for introduction as opposed to adoption? Does it have to be? Presumably, we could make changes between the introduction and the adoption stages, could we not?
Yes, we have in the past.
Nice to have it as close as possible. It would be nice to have it as close as possible, but.
I'm sorry. Where would you introduce? When would you introduce the budget?
Well, I don't. Maybe, hate to call it a special session, but I'd be willing to do that.
I would agree because it'd be easier.
Yeah.
And the problem is that you still have to allow for 30 days. then you'd have to allow for 30 days.
You don't have to have 30 days between introduction and adoption. You just have to have the 30 days before the end of the fiscal year to have an adopted budget.
Okay.
Our charter allows for 6 days between ordinance introduction and adoption if it's a non-emergency.
Okay. So that's not, so having another meeting is not, or a special meeting just for introduction purposes is not undoable.
Right.
Right. I mean, I think another option would be to introduce it today, and then I'll send around what I heard as the changes that you all want for the adoption, and then there's time to get back to me and tell me, you know, no, that's not, you didn't hear us right. That's not what we want to do here. Or, you know, hopefully at the adoption stage, then any changes would be minimal, but we can still adopt as amended.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I was suggesting.
If you're willing to do that, I would be grateful to you.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I think that's kind of how it's worked the last couple of times, so that's not uncomfortable for me if that works for you all.
Yeah, I'm fine for that.
I would just need to know if we're adopting for the introduction, if we're adopting for the introduction as it was sent over, and then understanding I will be sending you amendments basically shortly thereafter so that we can get it tight for the adoption.
Yes.
And Kaki, I think that's what you're getting at as well, just understanding the procedural part of it.
Yeah, but I would actually be saying you're introducing with the amended changes so that you have the freedom, if you will, the liberty to go ahead and make changes as you've heard them here, because this has been approved now. If the council approves this as for introduction with the amended changes, then you've got the liberty to do that, and then you bring it forward at the you can still distribute it later and just say this is what I'm doing and how it's carrying out, and then at the adopted stage, if they're tweaking it, we would tweak it, of course, and they'd adopt with any more tweaks. I don't feel comfortable just approving the introduction as they're written, as it currently is, and then you're going back and forth tweaking. I feel like you need to introduce with these proposed changes, and that it's, you know, I'm repeating myself, but that's where you would then, Andrea, have the freedom to go and based on the notes and everything, you make your adjustments, send it out to council for their review. If everything still looks good, you know, you're adopting it the next council meeting, or you're still tweaking it even at the adoption. But that's I can back out of this. Whatever you guys want to do, whatever's most efficient.
I'm wearing my clerk hat on this one, sort of thinking about I'll need to post something up, and it needs to be something that we all agreed on today. And so the easiest way to do that is either if we're introducing as amended, then I need to know the specific amendments that we'd be talking about. Otherwise, we would need to be. You know what I'm getting at?
Okay. Yeah, no, I do.
Otherwise, I don't know which one is sort of the official record.
The motion.
Yeah.
Right. Somebody wants to make the motion to approve the introduction of this, and then Andrea will get the numbers going and get them back, and tweak it in at the adoption stage. Does everybody go along with that?
We would introduce it the way it is now, and then we would wait for the amendments versus the introduction as amended.
Yeah, because
right. If we do the introduction
said,
as amended.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Andrea. I think you were speaking. I don't know what that was in the background.
Yeah, if we're going to do the introduction as amended, I would just need to know what are the specific amendments. I would need to have them listed out so that I know what's the official kind of record that's part of this ordinance introduction.
So it's easier for Andrea just if you approve the introduction as the original numbers are here, and then she can go back and
Amended.
make the changes based on the notes and the discussion, and you adopt as amended. You adopt as amended later, yeah.
That sounds.
And also, it would be for posting. You know, that's what you were saying too, Andrea, right? I mean, you post what's been introduced, and this is easy because you already have these are the numbers. Without making any changes here in the introduction, you make them in the adoption.
That's the part of this that makes me very uncomfortable, because we've gone to great lengths here over the course of 3 hours to address the current crisis situation through our budget reductions, and then to just leave it out there in the public space that we didn't make any cuts until we get all the amendments made, I think would be very confusing for residents. So I would rather that we arrange this in a way that we can post the amended go to adoption.
Then we need to go through then and spell out what those amendments are that everybody is in agreement with for revenue operations and capital.
Right. So, well, could we go the route?
Or we have another special budget meeting in the next couple weeks or something before the adoption.
Exactly.
6 days apart.
I agree.
So it would require, another budget meeting. So you can introduce, so that you all would introduce.
I would vote for another budget meeting.
Okay, what do we got now?
This is Phil. I'd vote for another budget meeting if we get it cleaned up with what we know now, and then we introduce it in another meeting.
I'm afraid I'm going to agree with Phil, because the fact is that I think we've opened a lot of issues and haven't resolved them, and I wouldn't want to put Andrea on the spot of having to resolve those issues for us. And if we try to resolve them sometime later on today, or as a part of this meeting, we'll spend another hour.
Oh yeah, I don't think anybody wants to do that, right? I'm looking at the calendar. Andrea, are you looking at the calendar? We have election on the 4th, which is roughly 7 or 8 days away. We have the town council on the 11th of May, which is where you would adopt. You'd want to adopt, unless we do that even later in the month and still have it 30 days ahead of the end of the fiscal year. So do any of you all have your calendars? Are you looking at what the potential days might be? We're looking at, the possibility of maybe next Friday, which is May 1st. And this is going to depend on, Andrea, your ability to get anything done. I don't want to impose any date on you if you're not going to be able to do it.
Yeah, this
do you have a sense of the workload, Andrea, for you?
I mean, it's so unknown with the election, right? With being vote by mail. I'm just not sure what.
Yeah.
Isn't our vote from
mail?
now?
Do you want to hold that off until like the 7th or 8th after that election?
Well, I'm just thinking.
Would that be easier?
I know Monday is potentially a busy day. Election-related items. Possibly Tuesday.
I mean, there's nothing to say that you. Right. You could still have an introduction after the election, and then at least 6 days later, you could still adopt, as long as it's 30 days before the end of the fiscal year. But if Hans wants to be a part of this, which I wouldn't blame him, then, we're going to have to do it before the election. For the introduction, at least. You all have to speak up.
That would be May 1st, probably at 5, right?
Yeah, if that's doable.
I'll do whatever is necessary.
How about we set another 5 o'clock on Friday, May 1?
Okay. Jerry Lee, are you okay with that?
With a time limit on it?
Well, it's up to you guys how much you want to discuss. Sure. Jerry Lee, are you okay with May 1st at 5?
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay, and Stephen, are you okay?
I'd like to keep it short.
5 o'clock?
I feel like some of these issues we talk about and they just keep hanging around.
Yeah. When is it likely that, without rushing you, Andrea, that you might have the next step in ready enough to send out? I'd like to have at least 2 or 3 days before I can, at least a day before May 1st. Because I think
I'll do the best I can. That's all I can say. I mean, I'm working every day.
Of course.
I've been working every day since all this started. So.
No, I understand. I really appreciate it.
It's hard for me to predict because it kind of depends on what, again, how Monday and Tuesday goes with election-related items, and I don't know how to predict that, having not done vote by mail before. But I hear you, and I will prioritize this.
Okay, is Dan?
Thank you very much.
Has Dan come back to the council meeting?
Oh yeah, I've been here, just sort of
We didn't hear you. Okay.
Amazed.
Well, Dan, are you okay if we have a meeting on May 1st at 5 o'clock to really introduce the budget?
Yeah,
And, I think be looking at the numbers ahead of,
Sure. I just think as a group, we need to agree that we're going to start meetings on time, which we haven't done at all. And then we're going to end meetings. And if there's still stuff to talk about when we reach the end of a scheduled time, let's end the meeting and then schedule another one. At some point, everyone will decide to talk less or be more efficient. But I think, keeping the meeting, and by the way, I'm not blaming anybody. This is like, I would direct this at all of us, myself included.
Right. I was asking for your input and I was told you were away. So I didn't know when you came back. I'm sorry, I would have reached out, but
I've commented a few times.
You stepped away. I just don't know when you came back.
Yeah, I commented a few times out loud once I was back, but that's okay. So,
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Sure, that's fine. I'm good. I mean, it's 8 o'clock on a Friday night, right? So I'm on hour 14. The days get a little long. Scheduling meetings at Friday night at 5, when we schedule them to 6:15. We're all adults and we've got an obligation. So I think we can do better. And I'm appreciative of everybody's efforts. I'm just simply pointing out that we can do better. So yeah, sure. Schedule it for next Friday at 5. I think that for discussion points, we should all be committed to do homework. So if Andrea sends out the stuff in advance, do your homework. I think we should submit our questions or our discussion points in advance, and we should try to avoid the kind of if-then meandering dialogue that ends up happening via a conference call. It's just incredibly inefficient, and I'm sure painful for everybody involved. I know there's other people have kids at home.
Dan?
So, yep.
Right. Dan, I certainly appreciate and agree with you to try to keep it shorter. It's very hard to discuss budget and numbers if you're not, fully understanding what the numbers are and what you may be doing in some sense. And I guess I can help you with this, Andrea, but if it's for people to go ahead, review the budgets ahead of time, send in their comments or it's not really for comments, it's sending in questions to better understand it. That will take time too from Andrea. So Andrea, if that happens, I'm willing to help you with that. But, that's what budget discussions are. It's not just a cut and dry because everybody's going to have different questions and different perspectives. I've done budget for so many years. It's not a straightforward, boom, boom, boom. But you've made a great attempt tonight, I have to say. And we might just be able to go cleanly through it all next Friday.
And I think the one thing that we've got to remember is that we are a public body and we have to debate this and have some discourse
Mhm.
in front of the public. So unfortunately, some of this back and forth
Mhm.
is going to end up costing some time, but we have to do it in the public eye. I mean, that's part of our business. That's part of what we have to do.
Agree.
Yeah, I have no problem with the public eye. I'm just saying there's homework to be done. There's information that can be submitted. I understand the Open Meetings Act. I get that it takes time. The other thing is an accurate forecast of the meeting. If a meeting is scheduled to start at a start time, it should start then. If it has an end time, it should end then. If we need more time, schedule the meetings for longer. That is an unassailable position that I'm stating. There is no
Okay.
rational debate with that.
Okay, and I think we were doing pretty good when we were all physically in the town hall. I think, we're all still having a little bit of technology issues, and I know I did myself. But also, Dan, at 7 o'clock, or it was 7:20 because we started at roughly 20 or 25 after. I said, okay, it's 2 hours. I don't know if you were in the meeting then. I don't know that I heard you, but it was like, okay, do you want to keep going? Do you want to, I wanted to get input from the council about how to go. So people said, let's go forward and see if we can get it done quickly. But that was the discussions happened, and here we are at 8 o'clock. So.
Yeah, and Kaki, just to reiterate,
the lack of trying.
Kaki, I'm not indicting you. I'm holding myself as equally responsible. I'm making a statement to us as a group that we can do better. That's it.
Okay.
Okay.
I just want to remind you that
Next Friday at 5 o'clock.
Kaki,
Okay.
you have public comment on the agenda. I just want to make sure we don't forget about that. On tonight's agenda, we still have public comment.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to do that tonight. I think we can just do it, we should do it next Friday because we'll still have a discussion with the introduction. I think it's too late now. It's 8 o'clock. I'd like to adjourn if everybody else would.
Yes.
Okay. Is that okay, everybody? We're going to adjourn? All right. One more,
Thank
please.
you.
Seconded.
Dan, somebody?
Seconded.
Okay.
Thirded.
All right. We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.